Hi, so today I'm going to be talking to you in a short video about what to do if you find yourself in the circumstance that you need to or want to talk to a professor about a grade, in particular, a grade that you're not happy about. Now, for obvious reasons, this is not exactly a conversation that anyone's particularly thrilled to go into. It's often very uncomfortable for students. And for a lot of reasons, students and faculty often come into these conversations from very different directions that make it very likely that neither the students or faculty go out of those interactions particularly happy. So what I really wanted to do in this video is to give you some ideas of what's going on in the minds of your faculty when you're having these conversations, but more importantly, to give you some tips and some potential scripts to make it more likely that that conversation is going to go in a way that is potentially more successful for you, successful in this case, potentially being getting a stronger grade if it's warranted. And even if you don't get a grade that you're really happy with or get a grade change, actually having some outcomes that feel positive or at least not traumatic for you, because the last thing you want to do is to go out of one of these conversations not only having not having had a positive outcome in terms of your grade, but also feeling nervous or unhappy about your future relationship with your professor, because that's sort of the nightmare I think that many students probably have. So that's basically what I want to cover in this video. And I'm hoping it won't be too terribly long while also being informative and useful to you as you go forward, whether in my class or in anybody else's class. So before I get into the nitty gritty, I won't call it a disclaimer, but just kind of an umbrella over everything. One thing I would just mention in any of these cases, one, manage your expectations. So, be realistic when you're going into these conversations, not only about what's going on in your paper or your assignment, whatever kind of assignment it is. I'm a writing teacher, so of course my brain always goes to paper, but also consider the personalities involved. That of the faculty member who, by the time you have a major assignment, at least you've probably gotten some kind of an idea of what kind of personality they likely are, but also have an idea of your own personality and how you tend to react to stressful conversations, stressful situations, so that you can kind of manage also your own likely response to different outcomes and think about that ahead of time so that you don't find yourself in an uncomfortable situation or a situation that you don't want later. So just, kind of keep that in mind. That's going to be different from person to person. So the first thing that I'd like you to keep in mind that tends to make a lot of these conversations go poorly from the outset is that students and faculty tend to look at grades very differently. And it's very natural that we do because we use grades differently and therefore we perceive grades very differently. And that has a huge effect on the way that these conversations tend to go. So if I were to oversimplify in many ways, in general, students tend to think of grades in terms of their consequences. And if you think about it, for students, grades have many different kinds of short-term and long-term consequences. So a particular assignment's consequences might have short-term assignment consequences might be something like, how might this affect the next step in a multi-step assignment? It might be, how I perform on this assignment perhaps predict how I'm going to perform on other similarly constructed assignments later in the class? And also, of course, how is this going to affect my grade for the rest of the semester? And while faculty can often sort of rattle that off at the top of their head because they've often taught these classes very many times, for students that may often feel a little bit fuzzier, especially if they haven't spent a lot of time looking at their syllabus. So students tend to think of consequences. Again, those consequences might be short-term or they could be long-term. If I don't do well in this class, will I be able to get into my major? If I can't get into my major, how is that going to affect my career plans? If I'm on academic probation, how will a potential poor grade in this course affect my financial aid? Or will getting a poor grade in this class land me on academic probation? There are all kinds of ways that a student might be trying to figure out what kinds of consequences could potentially be linked up, maybe not even to this assignment, but to a trajectory that they see this assignment as being part of. Faculty, however, tend not to look at any one assignment or even all assignments. We don't look at grades in that same way, partially because the consequences aren't coming to us from a very selfish point of view, but also because for us, grades are actually there not to say, do we like a student? Do we not like a student? Do we think a student has potential or not have potential? All a grade means for us is what is the current demonstrated level of achievement by that student as measured by this assignment at this point in time, right? So for us, all an assignment's grade is sort of like taking the temperature. What was your temperature at this point in the course at this moment? It may or may not be representative of your general skill level. It may or may not be representative of your ability level. All we know is when we gave you this measurement device to kind of measure your skill level at this moment, this is what we got back. And that's really what a grade means to us. And one of the reasons why we have many grades throughout the semester, and also why they often are at varying point levels, right, is because it's very difficult to measure a person at one point in the semester and say that that's a good measurement of their skill level. This is also why those measurements tend to accelerate or at least become larger point levels near the end of the semester, when we can get a more accurate level of your achievement in the course goals by the end of the semester, right? So we're trying to figure out how close are you to achieving what we call the student learning objectives, the learning goals that the course is hopefully going to help the students achieve, and that any student will have achieved a certain level of mastery of if they have passed this course by the end of the semester. So for faculty, all a grade is basically saying, hey, this is how close to the mark of these course goals you're hitting at this moment in time when we used this tool, the assignment, to measure it. Again, for students, it's probably going to be much more weighted what that grade means in terms of future consequences. And it's important that we kind of pay attention to those differences, because those differences very frequently frame the discussions that students and faculty have, and the miscommunications and the kind of misfirings of communications that students and faculty have. So for example, when students often come to a faculty member to talk about a grade that isn't going well, often they're going to frame that conversation around their preoccupations at that moment, the things that they're worried about, the things that they're thinking about, which means often those conversations are going to sound something like, I really need to get this, fill in the blank grade, or I have to pass this course because if I don't, X terrible thing will happen. Or, but I really worked hard. I worked X hard. I worked X number of hours on this. This grade doesn't reflect who I am, what I did, who I want you to think I am. And what's happening right there is the student One is trying to think about consequences, and two is kind of asserting a kind of ethos of self. This exercise, I've been labeled with this grade through this exercise, and I don't feel that it accurately represents who I am. And from the faculty member's point of view, this is basically a kind of conversation that we can't meaningfully respond to, right? Because for us, the grade doesn't mean any of those things, right? For us, we might feel personally sympathetic. We can see a student's distress, right? Especially if they're kind of internalizing what they think a grade means to them or to us. So we might be kind of personally sympathetic and try to reassure the student that, look, this isn't a kind of personal judgment. Or we might kind of sympathize, or we might kind of say, okay, I can tell you're really worried about X potential consequence, but we can't sort of professionally respond in the sense of being able to, quote, help a student get a grade that to us falsely represents their level of achievement in the course at that point, because that would essentially be faking a result on a measurement, right? That test or that assignment. And so what ends up happening is you have this kind of friction between the way both of these people in this conversation understand the conversation that they're having and the way they frame what the conversation is about. And so often these conversations are unproductive from the beginning because the sort of value and the terms that are being discussed aren't shared between the two people. So that's a really roundabout way of saying that if we want this conversation to be productive, and for the student, me as a faculty member, I'm trying to tell you as a student, you need to figure out how to motivate or reframe the conversation so that you can motivate the person who can potentially help you out. You need to reframe the conversation in such a way that they feel that it's appropriate to help you. And if you frame the conversation around what you need or what you deserve or why it's a problem that you got this grade, as opposed to what that grade means in terms of the class, and that you understand that, chances are that conversation is going to go nowhere, and both you and the faculty member are going to leave that conversation with some pretty rotten feelings that are going to actually cause at least as much damage to the rest of the semester, how you feel in the class, how you're able to focus in the class, as that assignment probably did. So how to reframe this conversation? One, you want to reframe the conversation around assignment or course goals. This is a conversation that your faculty member can respond to in a productive way. They're also likely to feel more open to, because it seems like you're responding to the values of the course, right? And that you take the learning goals of that course seriously. So to get kind of step by step about it, what happens if you frame the conversation around assignment or course goals is that you are sort of performing a kind of interest in the class, even if it's not true. That's okay. We can fake it. We fake things every day in order to get by in a social world. You're demonstrating awareness and performing the value of the course learning objectives. So it doesn't look like you're just trying to get by, or you're just trying to get somebody to give you something. It looks like, hey, I not only understand, but I care about what this class is about. And so that's going to make it more likely that your faculty member is going to think that you're going to have a conversation worth having. It gives you an opportunity to show evidence, right? To make an argument and to give evidence that a grade can and should be changed, that in fact it may be wrong. And this has happened before. I've had cases where students have come to me and they've said, look, these are the grading criteria, and it says that a B- should do these things. And look here on page 3 and 4, maybe I didn't do it on page 2, but on page 3 and on page 4, I was totally hitting those benchmarks, and I had to look at it and go, you know what, you are right, I missed that. What are you gonna do? Yeah, I did that, and kudos to you for spotting it when I didn't. Okay, so it gives a student an opportunity to show evidence, right? That a grade can and should be something other than what was originally assigned, but in a way that is showing respect to the course objectives rather than basing the argument on, I need this, as opposed to, I've earned this, right? Those are two radically different propositions. It also allows students to show your own course material knowledge in the argument, right? So it allows you to kind of show, to demonstrate that you understand the material, because as you're making the argument about your own work, in order to do that, you've got to demonstrate some awareness of what's being taught, okay? So these are some things to kind of think about. It changes the kind of conversation you're about to have, and it meets the professor on the kind of grounds that they can give you some leeway, and they can have a conversation that might be productive with you. Okay, so practically, what does this mean? It means that if you're going to have a conversation that is likely to go well for you, you need to be able to make an argument that your paper's grade is at least ambiguous, or could be ambiguously argued to belong in a different tier than it does. Now, for that to work, you need to be able to point to what the criteria are for the grade. And there are different places where you might find these. And this is going to be different from course to course. Some professors are more explicit about their grading criteria than others. 20 years ago, it wasn't all that common for grading criteria to be super explicit. It's becoming more and more expected, but to be honest, it really is different from teacher to teacher and course to course. So just to kind of give you some idea of the different places where you might find this type of information. Number one, if your professor has something called a rubric is just a fancy pedagogical term for grading criteria, and it can be found in a bunch of different places. Number one, it might actually be written on the assignment material. So if you have a physical handout, it could be on the handout. If it's a document, it might be on a digital document. Rubrics can come in a couple of different forms. Sometimes they'll be broken down in terms of points, this many points for this facet of the argument, this many points for this facet of your assignment, and then they all add up to however many points the assignment is worth. Sometimes they're what we call holistic. For example, my rubrics are holistic, where I will say, here's a cluster of attributes that I would expect to see in an F paper. To get a D, here are the things that would distinguish a D from an F. A C achieves all the things that a D achieved that made it better than an F, but on top of that, here are the benchmarks that it would have to hit to bring it up to a C rather than a D, and then so on all the way up to A, like C to C plus, B, B plus, and then up to A. Again, this can be located in different places. So you can have, again, a holistic, or you could have a numerical. These are just different ways faculty may have of explaining where your grade comes from and how they assign a grade to work that's submitted. It can be on the assignment documentation. It can be Sometimes in different places on Blackboard, it can actually be something that you will actually see after you've turned something in, submitted something to Blackboard or had it graded. Sometimes faculty will include the grading criteria or the rubrics as part of the overall syllabus. So sometimes when you see those 20-page syllabus documents, that's part of what makes it such a packet. And sometimes you'll find them on a course website or course handouts. So for example, when we're not online, I hand out the grading criteria to all of our students and then also keep it on Blackboard. Right now we're online, so I keep it on our course website, and it's under course syllabus and documents. If you scroll down, I have paper grading criteria, and I also have one separate for how I grade discussion boards. So that's where you'd find it in my class. In other classes, they may have rubrics in different places, and you can always ask your faculty member, where are the grading criteria? Or if they don't explicitly have it written down, you can ask them, what are the grading criteria? I would like to know how to succeed on this assignment. The other thing you can do is take careful notes, right? When they're talking about the assignment, if they don't have it. Now, sometimes they don't have an explicit rubric, but that doesn't mean that you're out of luck. There are other places where you can look for that information. So some of those places that you might look are going to be, they might not have a rubric, but you can still look at the assignment materials where they talk about the goals or the expectations. That might not include explicit grading material, but you can take notes. What were the goals of this assignment? What did you tell me you wanted me to get out of this assignment, or that you wanted me to do in this assignment? That's one place to look. Again, your class notes related to the assignment, what they told you at the time that they gave you the assignment, useful. This is a plug for taking good notes. Also, you can look at the syllabus. Even if they don't have an explicit rubric, there are a couple of different places you can look. One, there's usually an assignment breakdown. And so you can look to see if there's any detail about this particular assignment. That's one place to look. Also, there's often, it might be called different things at different institutions or in different classes, but at all CUNY classes at least, we typically have a section for what we call the SLOs, the student learning objectives. And what those are the official learning goals for this course. So let's say there's no documentation that makes it super clear what the goals are for this assignment, though the assignment sheet or materials should tell you something. But let's say you can't find anything, there's nothing in writing there, then your last kind of recourse is to basically say, okay, what are the goals of this course? What is this course supposed to be teaching me according to my syllabus? And then you can take notes about that and then use that as your gauge for what you were doing in your assignment and try to build your argument around those materials. So I hope that makes sense. Your number one best source of information, if it's available, is a rubric. If you don't have a rubric, the next place that you want to go is going to be the assignment sheet and see if there's just anything, or sorry, materials. I always think in terms of physical handouts, but those aren't always available, but your assignment materials to see what the expressed goals or directions or expectations on that documentation. Your class notes related to that assignment. And then your last resort is the syllabus and the general course goals. So these are the places where you want to kind of look for what the expectations and what the goals for the assignment, or if not the assignment, the course are. Okay, so now you've done that. What do you do next? Well, number one, I'm going to recommend that you take a breath. Okay, and the reason why I say that is none of us is at our best when we are trying to argue, when we're coming from a place of distress or worry or upset. So one of the things that I've instituted in my classes is I basically have a 24-hour radio silence after I assign a major grade. And that's as much for my students' benefit as mine. It's not like, oh, I don't want to hear it from you. But I basically do set it up where I want people to have 24 hours of cool down period where they can just kind of sit with the grade, breathe, get a little bit of emotional distance before they check in with me about the grade or before they try to have a conversation with me about the grade, because they're usually not in the best moment to have a productive conversation about the grade when they're in the first flush of responding to just a number or a letter. It's really hard to get that objective distance when you're just like in that first minute. So I have a 24-hour radio silence myself. Obviously, if you're looking at this from being in a different class, that's not going to apply to you, but I do recommend you take it. Take a day or so to let the emotions do their thing so that you can get the distance to make the best case for yourself that you can, because this is all about advocating for you. So that's the first thing that I would argue. It's hard to focus. It's hard to be analytical. Or to put together and or present your case effectively when you're in that kind of first moment of kind of being in your feelings. So take a day, breathe, come back, look at it, read the comments carefully, and make note of them. Once you've made note of their comments, go back, look through the assignment, and then make the list of the objectives of the assignment or the rubric information. So you can kind of compare the two next to each other, okay? So you want to make a quick list of the assignment goals or expectations. Again, if there's a rubric that discusses basically the various goals or level of achievement that's demonstrated at different grade levels, perfect, because then what you do is you can start taking notes to see if there's places where, let's say you got a C and you see places where you're doing things that the rubric says are B work. Take notes on that, highlight that kind of information. Go over your work and try to be objective. This is one of the reasons why that 24 hours, and who knows, 24 hours might not be enough. You might need a couple days. I probably would. But you go over your work, try to be objective, and just take notes of where you see the assignment goals and or the course goals being represented in the work that you submitted, and or any errors in the grading, because sometimes errors do happen. We are human beings, and sometimes your faculty will make mistakes. Obviously, just plain old mathematical errors, keep track of those too. And just kind of make a list, try to make it as objective as possible. And you can have some sections where you're even just have questions where I think this is doing this thing that is supposedly about a B, but I need to clarify that with you, because if this isn't, then I need to know what really is for the next text. And it's really important that you figure out ways to frame the conversation like that, because what you're doing in a moment like that is you're demonstrating that you care about not only the grade, because of course you do, but that you're also thinking about it in terms of the ideas of the course, in terms of the grading criteria of the course, which are about learning objectives, and that you're not only kind of stuck in this one moment of the assignment that happened, but that you're thinking in terms of the future and the assignments that are coming up. Because what that demonstrates to the faculty member is that you're working with them and that you're thinking about the whole class. You're not just kind of spiraling on this one assignment. And that's going to make them more likely to engage with you and more likely to think that this isn't a moment of just, but I want this grade. right? Which is a very different kind of conversation, okay? All right, so what you're gonna do, you're gonna take that rest, you're gonna go away from it for maybe a day or two. You're gonna come back, you're gonna first make a list of the where you can find them, the assignment and or course goals and expectations. If they are segmented in terms of different grades, even better, because that, you know, you can kind of slot your evidence in terms of these are the things that happened that were B level, these are the things that are happening in terms of C level, etc. And then go through, and I've sort of presaged this, go through your work again and see if you can make your case. Okay, once you've done that, a few different things might happen, right? So there are a couple of different outcomes that might happen once you've looked over that information, right? So number one, you might go through that information and think, maybe this isn't X grade I would really rather have. Now, for obvious reasons, that would be kind of a bummer, right? Because you want that, you know, you want that to be the higher grade, right? So let's say you go through all that information and you're like, you realize that the grade assigned is actually appropriate. That's going to be disappointing in the moment. There's no question. On the other hand, there are actually kind of silver linings to this. Number one, you've just made a huge leap, right? Because if you have gone from a place where a day or two ago, you didn't understand what you needed to do to get the higher grade, now you do. And assuming that this is an assignment type that's going to recur in the class, which is very frequent if it's a test, faculty members tend to be very predictable in having the same types of test questions or the same types of test formats. And we tend to be very consistent in the way that we grade essays or written assignments. So if you've had a breakthrough in terms of figuring out, oh, it got this grade because of these reasons, I needed to do X, Y, and Z to get to a B plus or to get to an A, you now, even if you can't make a good case for this grade to get higher, you know how to make the next grade, which is almost certainly going to be a bigger score. You know how to make it a stronger performance. So grades tend to escalate, right, by the end of the semester. So on this earlier assignment, you've learned valuable information to help you for later assignments. You also have the option, if you think that this professor, and again, this is going to be contingent upon your relationship with the professor and just kind of you sussing out what kind of person that professor is. But if you think the professor would be open to revision or reworking, you kind of have the opportunity to demonstrate your willingness to work within the course goalposts and your knowledge of those goalposts. So you can kind of say, you know, I know that I messed this up in these ways, but I think I could do a lot better with it in X, Y, and Z ways. Would you be willing to let me revise this? They may say no. Some courses, it's a matter of course that you can, then you have to just find out what their requirements are, or they may say no, just be aware of it for your next paper. That's disappointing, but at least you are aware of it for the next paper or exam or whatever. And you can kind of move on, but you haven't, I guarantee you, you will not have made a poor impression on them because of the way you're framing the question. It's also, however, possible that you're going to see evidence that your assignment either ambiguously or unambiguously could fit into a different grade than the one it was originally assigned. So you might see that it's like right on the line, or you think it might be right on the line, or you might be like, you know what, this really should have been a B and I got a C, or whatever it is, right? If that's the case, again, you want to take very good notes You want to make a case. Because again, your faculty are human, they're going to have to be persuaded, and you're having to persuade them that they made a mistake. So you want to be a little bit careful about the way that you approach it, because you don't want to get them defensive and in their feelings, right? When you're essentially asking them to take a second look and to make this change. All right, so you want to take those notes, have your information and the assignment as graded ready and available to them to see. If you're in an online class, obviously this might present some more difficulties. It's easier if they allow screen sharing. If not, you might need to email them the document during an office hour. If they don't allow screen sharing, you're just probably going to have to either scan it and email it to them, or if it's all electronic, just email it to them, because you want them to have it in front of them as well. If you have notes on it as well, send it to them with the notes so that they can see where your argument is coming from. They may disagree with your notes, and you might gain some further insight into how the grading actually works. But that's a possible outcome. Okay, so a few things. You want to request an appointment with them. Now, if you can go in during the regular office hours, great. Make sure that you have the documents ready so you can email it to them in the moment as soon as you get in. Sometimes their office hours don't work for you. Then what you would need to do is email them and ask if there's another time that they could meet with you, explain that their office hours don't work for you. Give them several days and times you're available so that they can pick one that works for them. It makes that whole process of scheduling a ton easier. Pro tip: anytime you need to make an appointment with a professor, give them a few ranges of days and times that work for you, and let them pick one, and make sure they actually work for you, so that you don't say, oh no, that doesn't work. And then they're going to be like, well, then why'd you tell me? Okay, so there's that. Make the appointment. Have the documents, files ready, so that when you have the appointment and you're ready to talk to them, you can email them to them immediately. Be respectful. I know that it's very annoying for me to be like, hey, and then you've got to kind of baby their feelings a little bit, but essentially you're asking them to not get in their feelings when they've got power in the situation. And that's very annoying. And we want everybody to behave well in the situation, but you definitely want to come off in this interaction as if there's something that you want and potentially might deserve, that you believe that you deserve according to the rules of the course. And you might want to use the phrase, it's my understanding that the rubric or that the assignment goals are X, and I believe that I've achieved them in X, Y, and Z places. If that's not the case, can you explain to me why and what I would need to do to achieve those goals? So what that does is it says, I believe that I've reached this grade for these reasons that are based in your own documentation and your syllabus and your rubric, yada, yada, yada. But if that's not the case, I need you to translate those in a different way, because the way I'm reading these documents is apparently not accurate. And then hopefully they'll respond positively to that. So you want to kind of have a tone that basically says, I'm professional. This is driven by my understanding of the course goals. Here's the information as I understand it. Is my understanding correct? And if it's not, I need a clear explanation for why. Okay, so you want to stress that you're arguing from a framework of the course and assignment objectives. Do not let the words, but I worked X hard on this, or I need this grade because, come out of your mouths. It'll undermine everything that you're trying to do. Once you've kind of gone down that line, many of your professors will just shut down, no matter how much they like you, no matter how much they care about you. And we do care about you as people. That's not an argument we can really professionally respond to in terms of grades. I mean, there are some things that we can sometimes maybe do, but in terms of changing X grade to Y grade, no, not so much. Okay, be ready for the possibility that they'll push back or explain the assignment goals in a way you weren't expecting, or that they sort of translate it in a different way. That can be sometimes a little bit negotiable, right? Like you both can push back a little bit on that, but ultimately they are grading the course. So, you know, there's only so much you can push back. Ultimately, they are the person who's teaching the course and who understands the way that those things are going to be evaluated, because they're the evaluator. But there can be a little bit of give and take, but you can't make them change the grade. So if they're really going to be kind of stone about it, you can't make them move. In that case, the best thing you're going to get out of that interaction is a fuller understanding of how to do better on the next assignment. And so you want to make super clear that that is a secondary goal of yours. Okay, because it's going to make the rest of that interaction come out a lot more smoothly, and it's going to make both of you feel like you somehow succeeded in that conversation, which is going to make the rest of the class feel a lot less uncomfortable. Okay, so there are basically three possible outcomes, ideally, of this conversation. Number one, the goal that you're, I'm guessing, hopefully hoping for, is the professor agrees with you, right? They possibly made a mistake, they missed something, or they're willing to concede that your creative interpretation of the goals is actually a legitimate interpretation of the goals. And so they're willing to adjust the grade accordingly. Yay, profit, goal, good for you. If that happens, thank them for their time. Thank them for listening to you, right? And you know, listening to your argument, you know, because it's a social interaction, all the niceties. And then make sure before you end the conversation that you ask them if they need anything else from you, if you should follow up with them, because you got to make sure they actually change the grade, right? If they would like you to send them a follow-up email or anything like that. So just check in with them about that. And then keep an eye on your grade book if you have an electronic grade book to make sure it actually happens. Okay, that's outcome number one. That's kind of the ideal outcome. Outcome number two, professor doesn't agree with you, but they offer you an opportunity to revise based on your new understanding of the assignment objectives. This could happen. I don't know how often that might happen, but it could. It is extra work for the professor, but they might kind of decide to throw you a bone because you seem invested and you seem willing to put in this work for it. And they might be like, you know what? Okay, let's give you another shot at that. Could happen. And then there are some classes too where revision is an option all the time. Like my class, you always have the option to revise a paper. This obviously isn't as optimal as them agreeing with you from the outcome, but it's a good opportunity for you to kind of build a relationship with your professor, to kind of build trust with them. It's obviously an opportunity for you to raise your grade in the course, and it's a good opportunity for you to get a better understanding of how they're looking at the assignment goals and assignment structure, that kind of thing. So again, it's an opportunity for you to do better on all your future assignments, as well as to pick up some more points on the past assignment. So again, the kind of disengagement from that at the end is thank them for their time and their willingness to work with you on this. And then Take careful notes regarding their expectations for what you need to do for that revision. Timeline, what exactly they need from you, what's the format, do they need the original version as well? You know, you need to find out all of that information. Take careful notes. You may think you're going to remember it just all in your brain, but it's very unlikely. So have it in writing, and you might want to send a confirmation email with them afterwards to verify that that was the expectation. That's not a bad idea, just as a kind of cover your butt maneuver as well, because they might forget in the meantime. Remember, a lot of your professors may have well over 100, 150 students. It could be really easy for them to forget the exact terms that they set with you. So sending them a quick email saying, hi, we just had this conversation. These are the terms that we had. This is the timeline. Does this fit your recollection? And then they confirm it with you, or they change anything, you know, or, you know, they say, actually, no, really, it should have been X, Y, or Z. Then you have it in writing and it's in your email and it's saved. And so that's something to kind of protect you, because there's a record outside of both of your memories. Okay, the outcome that you're hoping not to get, but is not actually a complete tragedy as long as you guys can kind of navigate the trickiness of it, is the professor actually doesn't come to any kind of agreement with you. They don't think that the paper or the assignment has earned a different grade than the original grade, and they don't offer any kind of opportunity for you to improve the grade. Now, the way that you kind of navigate this is where it's really important to kind of understand your own responses, and to kind of have a good control over them, because we're all human. We have feelings, and you're probably going to be pretty disappointed, right? Because you went into that interaction hoping for a different outcome. What you want to do at that point is to thank them for having the conversation, and then ask them for help, right? We have all kinds of psychological studies that show that even if a person doesn't give you all the things that you want, they tend to feel better in these kinds of engagements when somebody kind of exhibits trust and exhibits that kind of desire for help. Here, ask them for help understanding the expectations or the criteria to perform better on the next assignment. That does a couple of things. It demonstrates that your concern is not only this one paper, it demonstrates your desire to do better on future papers, your continued desire to do well in the course, and your willingness to work with them, right? And your willingness to kind of work with them as your teacher / mentor. That's going to go a long way to paving over if they had any ruffled feathers from the preceding conversation. It's going to paper over pretty, you know, unless somebody's being super unreasonable, or you guys had a serious snarly spat earlier. It's going to pave over a lot. And hopefully that is going to put you in a place where both you and the faculty member are actually feeling pretty decent about each other. At the end of the semester, you aren't going to have, or not the end of the semester, the end of the conversation, and you aren't going to have an issue working together with each other for the rest of the semester. This is obviously the hardest outcome to navigate, but by demonstrating your desire to do better on these future assignments, you're hopefully learning things that are going to help you to do better in the rest of the semester. And you're kind of putting in a little bit of an investment in your relationship with this professor, and getting them invested in you doing well, and having them think well about your desire to do well for the rest of the semester. Again, the way you kind of disengage is you thank them for their time and their help, and you leave them on good terms. Obviously, it's not the outcome that you're really hoping for, but it's not a terrible outcome in terms of what you hopefully leave that particular interaction with. Kind of intel on how to do better in the future, and a productive interaction with a faculty member who might know that you were disappointed, but thinks that you've got your head on straight and that you've got good priorities in the course. As a faculty member, I can tell you that I generally consider that a good conversation. Like, I don't hold grudges against students who might have misunderstood the criteria or maybe took their chances, but, trying to argue for something else, but, that didn't come out, but they came out of the conversation having figured out a couple of things and they're kind of ready to take it on, maybe after licking their wounds for a day or two, which is perfectly normal and understandable. I don't find that offensive at all. So, that's basically how I would recommend as a faculty member trying to navigate what is, tricky. And it's not a fun thing for students to try to do. And a lot of times I think students go in blind, and it doesn't necessarily get you sometimes what you deserve, and certainly not what you go in hoping to get. So that's my advice. You can take it or leave it. You can take it to me or to your other faculty members, but I hope you find it useful, and I hope you have a good rest of the semester. So take care, and I'll see you later.